Hello, this is Leon Goodman. I'm known as Ignoramus on the web at www.ignoramus.us. I'd like to talk to you this morning about plans for the election of 2012. It was about 100 years ago, on about July 26th, 1912, that a group of Mormon settlers in Mexico, in Colonia Juarez, were told that they must leave their homes and leave Mexico for refuge in the United States. They traveled northward on a train and were essentially chased out of Mexico by Pancho Villa, a revolutionary of his time. In 2012 in El Paso, Texas, there will be a centennial, the 100th anniversary of the Exodus of Mormons from Mexico. I plan to attend that. A little bit of background. The Mormons had gone to Mexico because they could no longer live in the United States. They moved to that place in 1884. At that time, the federal government had passed a law, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had issued a manifesto indicating that no more polygamous marriages would be made in the territory of Utah. The church allowed that the men who had these polygamous marriages would not stop their responsibility for taking care of their wife and families, and allowed them to colonize outside the territory. And many moved south into Arizona and on into Mexico. In Mexico, they formed 9 colonies, one of them being Colonia Juarez. Benito Juarez was a hero of the Mexican history of independence. He was a native-born person who fought as a general and became president of the country. And many things are named after Benito Juarez. The city of Juarez, or Ciudad Juarez, is the city just opposite El Paso. About 200 miles south of that point, in Chihuahua, were the 9 colonies. The people traveled and left as if they were going from Egypt to Israel, or to the Holy Land. They arrived with crops to plant, and their crops were fruit trees for the first year. They found a fertile valley and started to grow their crops, and realized that the water was not going to be adequate for the peach trees which they had bought to mature their crops, and that there was going to be a drought every year because the river ran dry. The local populace called upon the Lord, and they fasted and they prayed, and then a great earthquake happened, and the aquifer, which feeds the river above, erupted and became a source of water for the full year from that point forth. So from 1886 about to the present day, water has been provided those people on a regular basis through a miracle of fasting and prayer. People in this travel group were Taylors, McDonald's, Farrs, and Romneys. Mitt Romney's great-great-grandfather was one of those people, Miles Park. From 1884 to 1912, the people lived in harmony. They built canals, irrigation canals, and dams, and a hydroelectric plant, and were building a civilization in the wilderness when they were expulsed from Mexico. These are historic times, a period of time after the Mormons left. For approximately 30 years, there were constant wars between the state of Mexico and religious institutions. A war called the Cristeros Rebellion occurred shortly after, and a group called themselves the Cristo Rey, which means Christ King, and that was their password and their byword for the time, formed to fight against the government, who had outlawed completely all religions, especially the Catholic Church. They crucified, in their own Spanish way, by hanging people from every telephone pole in every direction around the city, just as the Romans had done thousands of years before. So the picture that was recently portrayed in politics of the centurion working for Rome, crucifying a few people to subdue them and get their attention, is not a new thought. That's a new thought for Americans who heard a politician inadvertently say that. Al Armendariz, who, by the way, went to my high school in El Paso, Texas. His father went to my high school, and we had a Latin class together. But I digress. I'd like to talk about the upcoming election and what it means. The celebration of the Exodus of Mormons from Mexico will happen this July, and it's an opportunity for us to become familiar with a 6-year-old boy that was traveling from Mexico. It's like Fiddler on the Roof. It brings tears to my eyes to think about it. But he and his father left Mexico, came through El Paso, probably stayed a few days in the railroad yard as a staging place for further travels, and then moved forward to Idaho, where the home of his maternal great grandmother. She was born in Montpelier, Idaho, about 150 miles east of where I live today. They stayed in Idaho, worked a little while in the farms, and got their act together, and then began to move east. Mitt's father, George, had a variety of jobs. He worked as a carpenter, like his father had done. His father was a builder and developer in the colonies. Neither his father nor his grandfather were polygamists, but they moved with the group as support for the group to help them in their travels. George wound up in Detroit, worked at menial tasks in the automobile industry, and eventually wound up being the CEO of American Motors, one of the major automobile manufacturers at the time, and the father of the compact car known as the Nash Rambler. the first gas-efficient car built in Detroit. Later, of course, we know the story of Mitt going on to serve a mission in France, start his schooling in Stanford, meet important political figures on the right and the left, having an association with the Marriott family, the hotel chain people. Mitt's first name was Willard, after Willard Marriott. I go to the present and say that there are opportunities amongst the Mexican people to understand Mitt and his history of Mexico, his escape to the United States, and to the liberty that he wanted to achieve, the symbol of the flag of liberty. There is a song, La Paloma, in Mexico, which is the oldest and most famous melody on the planet. It's a Basque song, was sung in almost every country of the world. And the Mexican version talks about, in the beginning, of being in a cafe in Havana and realizing the importance of liberty. The words have changed throughout the seasons, and the recent words are quite political. Basically, it's a get out the vote song in Mexico. It is sung every election day. And the song is about exercising your rights as a voter, getting to the ballot box, and using the ballot box as a way to express your desires for government. The last verse is kind of ominous, the way it's sung today, because it mentions the United States as the country who flies airplanes over the border like eagles. And I think of the drones flying over the borders now. You see, in previous years, those airplanes didn't mean a thing. They weren't warplanes. But now those airplanes are Border Patrol planes. And it's almost prophetic that they would sing that song, but they sing it. And they sang it in the last election. It's been a song of left-wing politics because that's all there is in Mexico. This disturbance 100 years ago in Mexico, or actually it's 100 years, was actually a precursor to the Bolshevik Revolution. Remember, it happened in 1912, and the Cristeros War actually became active about 10 years later. And at that time, the president of Mexico was an agnostic. No, he was anti-religion altogether, and he wanted to wipe out religion. And his name was Calles, C-A-L-L-E-S, Calles, which to me, when I heard the movie, sounded like a character from Julius Caesar's day. However, I digress again. I do that at my age. In the United States, there were problems because Mexico had taken over all American oil interests in Mexico and nationalized them. They were forming the Soviet states of Mexico instead of the United States of Mexico. We assume United States means United States of America, those things north of the Rio Grande River. But the United States was also the United States of Mexico. And at the time, in 1820 area, when the second part of that revolution began to develop, and communists were being exported into Mexico, and Leon Trotsky, or Leo Trotsky he's sometimes called, fled to Mexico in order to prevent conflict with the political party. He was eventually assassinated in Mexico, and since then there have been prominent Marxists and communists in Mexico, and a control of the government for a period of 80 years or so after that. The same political party controlled Mexico, eventually be called the PRI party. That party still has strong influence in Mexico, and current elections are being conducted to try to overcome that party. So Mexico has struggled with socialism for a long time. Now, Mexicans who have migrated to the United States have brought some of their culture with them, and their culture is called La Raza. Raza is spelled R-A-Z-A. If you see it in the news, La Raza. La Raza goal right now is actually spoken as returning the land that was given up to the United States back to Mexico. In other words, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas goes back to Mexico. And the new Mexico is the bottom third of the United States. And they want to restore that. That's one group. La Raza is a continuation of the revolution that we're talking about in this piece. The opportunity here is to do things like take a singer like Linda Ronstadt or David Archuleta, who's not available right now because he's on a mission for the church, or somebody who is a prominent Mexican figure, to take this classic song that's a voter song of today's Mexican people and tweak the last verse, so to speak, and put United States and Mexico back into harmony with the thought that religious freedom is an essential part of the rights of man. The whole Cristeros Revolution, the Cristo Rey movement, was about religious freedom or individual rights. There is a new movie out called The Greater Glory. It came out on June 1st. One of the characters in the movie, the female part, is Eva Longoria. You know Eva Longoria as the Hispanic woman in Desperate Housewives. This is a very good film. I saw it. I cried all the way through it. I recommend going to see that film. If you can find it anywhere in your town. It's called The Greater Glory, and it's about that Mexican Revolution that occurred right after the expulsion of all religious people from Mexico. They hung priests in their own cathedrals. They tore down buildings and destroyed religious artifacts, and the people of faith were devastated. It was about to be an atheist country, just like the Soviet Union. In fact, government officials at the time began to call Mexico Soviet Mexico. That's politically incorrect to say now, but that's the truth, and that's revealed in this movie. I don't want to go too long because YouTube does not allow a video to stay up if it's too long, and I'll have to have special dispensation. I'm not sure how long I've gone now, but it's looks like it's in excess of the normal 15 minutes, so I'll have to get a dispensation to keep this up. I want to thank you for your time. I hope you visit me on ignoramus.us, and I hope that we can accomplish the things that we want to do, and that is to establish a rapport with the American people, put Mitt Romney in the Oval Office, and have a future brighter than what we face today. Thank you very much.